Right, next question. This was from Johnny Gazer. Another topic that had me curious is the band Deftones. I've seen you wear shirts of theirs a few times. I'm not sure how into them you are. They are a band that stuck with me since my formative years, and I feel that in some ways I've grown with them as their style has matured over the years. I could probably call them my favourite band of all time, even if I couldn't pick a specific time. They were definitely my favourite. So for me, it's like a difficult call because I have very broad tastes in music. When I was growing up, like two things happened to me at the same age, right? I got given a mixtape from a friend, which on one side was like Two Live Crew As Nasty As They Wanna Be, right? Which is a really juvenile 80s hip-hop album where all the songs have sexual lyrics. And on the flip side to the cassette, if you're a Zoom and you don't know what cassettes are, ask your parents. And on the flip side to the cassette was a bunch of NWA songs in no particular order. And the same friend gave me a double cassette, which was Slayer. What was it called? Decade of Aggression? It was their double live album. It was after Seasons in the Abyss. So I got given at the same time like formative hip hop and ridiculous metal. And I loved both of those. You know, I loved all of that when I was like very young. I thought that was great. So I always had like very broad tastes in music. And then when we went into the, mid to late 90s, it was trip hop, it was breakbeat. These were the things we were listening to, like Cold Cut Let Us Play was a really formative album for me. DJ Shadow Introducing is a fucking classic. Nightmares on Wax, Car Boot, Soul. These were albums every one of my generation had. But the difference between me and the people who had those albums were I had all of the Slayer catalogue. I had all of the Metallica catalogue. But I also had all of like NWA, all of Cypress Hill, whatever the 90, all of like Wu-Tang. So, like my stuff was like, I used to listen to all sorts of music, And so I never picked a genre and I never understood genre hatred. And what was super interesting is, a lot of people forget this in the musical history of things, pre what they call nu metal, right? There was these combinations where we threw hip-hop bands and rock bands together all through the mid to late 90s, and typically on soundtracks. And people forget there was like soundtracks like fucking, was it the Judgment Night soundtrack? Does anyone remember Judgment Night? It was like a movie about a bunch of guys in an RV, I think, who get stuck in a bad neighborhood. And anyway, like the Judgment Night soundtrack was a big one. Like bands like Faith No More and Booyah Tribe, Onyx and Biohazard, Anthrax and Public Enemy, Bring the Noise. That was a separate thing. But there was this blending of like metal and hip hop that, funnily enough, went on to inform the breakaway genre of nu metal. Principally, Deftones were original nu metal when they did Adrenaline. Obviously, Korn when they released their eponymous debut album. Limp Bizkit with $3 Bill, y'all. There was like this little branch that went off, and that's what nu metal was. And nu metal was good at first, and then you had a choice. The fork in the road for good bands was you blossomed into your own musical sound like the Deftones did, or you became Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit. And I think all of their stuff has aged terribly. I have this argument. I got a friend who thinks Significant Other is like one of the best albums of like the noughties. I think it's aged awfully. I think it's fucking embarrassing, frankly. I think it only gets worse for Limp Bizkit as their career goes on. But like, if you're the Deftones, they almost got sucked into it with Around the Fur. I thought that was very commercial. They did a lot of crossovers with Soulfly, which was Max Cavalera from Sepultura's new band, and they needed a big pop, so they did some collabs on the album, which I don't think were great. And I never really liked My Own Summer as a single, even though that was like a big track for the time. But I think once they got past that, you get White Pony, and White Pony is a modern rock classic, and it's got nothing to do with nu metal. So bands like Deftones, Tool, they go into this like stratospheric musical, world. Bands like Korn and very much Limp Bizkit. They go over here and it's just garbage. So yeah, I do love the Deftones. I think if you wanted me to like rate them out of all of the rock bands, it's very hard. But they're certainly one of my favorite bands that I come back to. I'm in and out on some of the albums. I won't lie. I think they've had lots of problems. Some is just creative bloat. Obviously, the death of the bassist. Well, a 2-year coma for their bassist, Chi Cheng, and then obviously his death. Them not wanting to release material they recorded prior to his car accident that put him in a coma. That really left them in a creative vacuum where they had to essentially create an album from scratch in a diminished period of time. But I think some of their later stuff like Ohms is fucking great. There's not many bands musically that endure as long as they have, because they've put out a banger album in every decade since the 90s. And they technically started at the end of the 80s. So, you know, that's fucking crazy. They're a great band, in other words. So...
to come back here and make trouble again. Eh? Yes, children. What does it all mean?